The monotony of the office cubicle was suffocating. I stared blankly at the spreadsheet on my computer, trying to muster the energy to care about the numbers dancing across the screen. Just another day, another grueling marathon of data entry and analysis. "Earth to Jessa," Marie's voice jarred me from my trance. My best friend leaned against the cubicle wall, her vibrant red hair and infectious smile a stark contrast to the drab office surroundings. "Hey, Marie," I replied, plastering on a half-hearted grin. "What's up? What's up?" She scoffed playfully. "Girl, you've been cooped up in this place for way too long. If you don't come out with us this weekend, I swear I'll drag you out myself." I sighed, knowing full well that Marie's threats were never idle. "Come on, you know I have this big project at work. The numbers won't crunch themselves." Marie rolled her eyes dramatically. "Work can wait. This is about living a little. Plus, I've heard there's someone you need to meet." My curiosity piqued despite my initial reluctance. Marie had a knack for sniffing out potential romantic interests, and her matchmaking skills were legendary. All right, you win. I'll come out this weekend." Her face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "That's my girl. Trust me, Jess. This one's going to be special." Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The weekend arrived, and Marie whisked me away to a local lake where our group of friends had rented boats for the day. As I stepped onto the dock, the warm sun kissed my skin, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of freedom. For a few precious hours, I allowed myself to shed the shackles of my routine and simply exist in the moment. It was during one of our breaks, as we lounged on the grassy shore, that Marie nudged me gently. "There he is," she whispered, nodding towards a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching our group. My breath caught in my throat as our eyes met. His smile was disarming, his gaze intense yet inviting. "So you're the esteemed accountant, Jessa?" he said, his voice rich and melodic. Suddenly self-conscious, I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "Yep, crunching numbers by day, trying to avoid too much excitement by night." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Well, we can't have that, can we? I'm Ethan, and I insist you join us for a bonfire at my cabin later. It's time you embraced a little adventure." As our eyes locked once more, I knew my life was about to change forever. Ethan's invitation sparked a flame within me, igniting a desire for adventure that had long been dormant. As our group gathered around the crackling bonfire at his cabin later that evening, I found myself drawn to him like a moth to a brilliant flame. The way he commanded the attention of those around him was mesmerizing. He regaled us with tales of his travels, his voice rich and captivating, painting vivid pictures in our minds, and whenever his gaze met mine, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between us. "So, Jessa," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "what's a brilliant accountant like yourself doing wasting away in some stuffy office?" I felt my cheeks flush at his compliment. "It pays the bills." I replied with a shrug, trying to play it cool. Not exactly the most exciting career path, but someone has to keep the numbers in line. He shook his head, a playful grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's a tragedy. A mind like yours deserves to be challenged, to be pushed to its limits. Have you ever considered working for a company that truly values your talents?" Before I could respond, Marie nudged me with her elbow, wiggling her eyebrows suggestively. I shot her a warning glance, but the damage was done. Ethan had piqued my curiosity. As the night wore on and the fire dwindled to embers, our group slowly dispersed, leaving Ethan and me alone in the flickering glow. We talked for hours, about our hopes, our dreams, our fears. It was as if we had known each other for a lifetime, our connection transcending the boundaries of time and space. When the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, I knew my life would never be the same. Ethan had awakened something within me, a hunger for more than just the mundane existence I had grown accustomed to. Over the next few weeks, our bond deepened with each stolen moment we shared. Ethan was like a whirlwind, sweeping me off my feet and carrying me to heights I had never dared to dream of. His charm was intoxicating, his confidence contagious. And then, one fateful evening, as we strolled hand in hand through a moonlit park, he stopped and turned to face me, his eyes shining with an intensity that stole my breath away. "Jessa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel like I've known you forever. It's almost unsettling how easy it is to talk to you, to be myself around you. My heart pounded in my chest as I gazed up at him, lost in the depths of his eyes. I know the feeling, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. It's like we're picking up a conversation from another lifetime. And with those words, he pulled me close, his lips crashing against mine in a kiss that set my very soul ablaze. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, my life would never be the same. Little did I know just how true those words would prove to be. From that fateful night in the park, my relationship with Ethan progressed at a dizzying pace. It was as if we were making up for lost time, desperate to cram a lifetime of moments into every fleeting second we spent together. He showered me with affection and attention, sweeping me off my feet with grand gestures and whispered promises. And I, foolish and blinded by the intensity of my feelings, surrendered myself completely to the whirlwind romance. It wasn't long before Ethan insisted on introducing me to his family, a prospect that filled me with equal parts excitement and trepidation. I had never been one to crave the spotlight, and the thought of meeting the people who had shaped the man I loved filled me with a nervous energy. "Don't worry, darling," Ethan soothed, sensing my apprehension. "My mother can be a bit intense, but she'll adore you once she gets to know you." I should have heeded the warning in his words, but love had blinded me to the potential dangers that lay ahead. The day of our first family dinner arrived, and I found myself standing on the doorstep of Ethan's childhood home, a sprawling estate that spoke of wealth and prestige. As the heavy oak door swung open, I was greeted by a woman whose steely gaze and pinched expression immediately set me on edge. "So you're the one Ethan's been raving about," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I can't say I'm impressed." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Margaret," she snapped, her eyes narrowing, "and you would do well to remember that." Before I could respond, Ethan appeared, his warm smile a stark contrast to his mother's icy demeanor. "Mother, please," he chided gently. "Jessa is our guest. Let's not scare her off just yet." Margaret huffed but stepped aside to allow us entry. As we made our way into the opulent dining room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into the lion's den, and the predator was circling. Dinner was a tense affair, punctuated by Margaret's pointed barbs and veiled insults. Ethan tried his best to deflect her attacks, but it was clear that his mother held a deep-seated disdain for me, a disdain that only seemed to grow as the evening wore on. "So, Jessa," Margaret drawled, swirling her wine-glass with a practiced air of nonchalance, "what exactly are your intentions with my son?" I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," I stammered. Margaret's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly well. A girl from your background snaring the heir to the family fortune? Forgive me if I'm a little skeptical of your motives." The words stung like a physical blow, and I felt the heat of humiliation rising in my cheeks. Before I could formulate a response, Ethan intervened. "That's enough, Mother," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Jessa is the woman I love, and you will treat her with respect. If you can't do that, then we're leaving." Margaret's eyes flashed with fury, but she said nothing more. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence, and as Ethan and I made our way back to his car, I couldn't shake the feeling that a battle line had been drawn. Little did I know, it was merely the opening salvo in a war that would soon consume us all. Despite Margaret's blatant hostility, Ethan remained resolute in his love for me. He insisted that his mother would eventually come around, that her sharp tongue was merely a defense mechanism against the threat of change. "She's been through a lot," he explained one evening as we lay tangled in each other's arms. "My father's death hit her hard, and she's never really recovered from it. But deep down, she's a good person. She just needs time to see that you're not a threat." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of Margaret's cutting words still stung like an open wound. Still, I clung to the hope that Ethan was right, that his mother's icy exterior would eventually thaw. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and I grew even closer, our bond strengthened by the shared adversity we faced. He showered me with affection and attention, as if trying to make up for his mother's disdain with an overabundance of love. It was during this time that he broached the subject of me joining the family business, a multinational corporation that had been in the Ethans family for generations. At first, I was hesitant, unsure of my ability to navigate the treacherous waters of such a high-stakes enterprise. "Nonsense," Ethan scoffed, his eyes alight with confidence. "You're the most brilliant woman I know. With your talent for numbers and your keen mind, you'll be an asset to the company." Against my better judgment, I allowed myself to be swayed by his flattery and my own desire to prove myself worthy in Margaret's eyes. Little did I know that by accepting Ethan's offer, I was walking straight into the lion's den, with no idea of the dangers that lurked within. My first day at the office was a whirlwind of introductions and orientation sessions, but one encounter stood out like a beacon in the fog. As I was being shown to my new workspace, a stunning woman with raven hair and piercing green eyes strode past, her gaze lingering on me for a fraction of a second too long. "That's Vanessa," my guide whispered, his voice tinged with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "She's the new hotshot executive Margaret brought in from overseas. Word is, she's a real shark in the boardroom." I brushed off the warning, too caught up in the excitement of my new position to pay much heed to office gossip. Little did I know that Vanessa would soon become the catalyst for a chain of events that would threaten to tear my world apart. As the weeks turned into months, I threw myself into my work, determined to prove my worth to Margaret and earn her grudging respect. But no matter how hard I toiled, no matter how many late nights I spent poring over spreadsheets and financial reports, her disdain for me never wavered. "This isn't some backyard budget you're playing with," she would snap, her eyes narrowed in contempt. "This is our legacy, and I won't have some upstart accountant jeopardizing everything my family has built." Her words stung, but I refused to let them deter me. I was convinced that if I could just prove my value to the company, Margaret would eventually see me as more than just a gold-digging interloper. Little did I know that Vanessa's presence was about to throw a wrench into my carefully laid plans. As the months rolled by, I found myself increasingly entangled in the web of office politics and power struggles that seemed to permeate every corner of the company. Margaret's disdain for me only grew more palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was actively working against me, undermining my efforts at every turn. It was during this tumultuous time that Vanessa began to make her presence felt. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance in the hallway, a casual brush of the arm as we passed each other in the break room, but soon her behavior became more brazen, more overt. "Jessa, darling," she would purr, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Have you had a chance to review those quarterly projections I sent over? I'd love to get your thoughts." Caught off guard by her sudden familiarity, I would stumble through a response, my cheeks flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. Vanessa seemed to revel in my discomfort, her emerald eyes sparkling with a predatory gleam. As the weeks wore on, her advances grew bolder, her touches more lingering, her innuendos more thinly veiled. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was toying with me, playing some twisted game whose rules I couldn't begin to fathom. Ethan, bless his heart, remained oblivious to the rising tension between Vanessa and me. Whenever I tried to broach the subject, he would wave it off with a dismissive chuckle. "You're imagining things, darling," he would say, pulling me close and planting a kiss on my forehead. "Vanessa's just a bit intense. It's all part of her charm." But I knew better. There was nothing charming about the way Vanessa's gaze would linger on Ethan whenever we were together, her eyes raking over his form with barely disguised hunger. It was a look I had seen before, a look that spoke of desire and ambition, a dangerous combination. Still, I tried to push my misgivings aside, convincing myself that I was simply being paranoid. Ethan loved me, and that was all that mattered. Or so I thought. It all came to a head one fateful evening when Ethan and I were working late at the office, poring over financial reports in preparation for an upcoming board meeting. We were the only ones left in the building, or so I thought. As I stepped out of Ethan's office to use the restroom, I heard a sound that stopped me dead in my tracks. The unmistakable sound of muffled laughter followed by a low, throaty moan. My heart pounding in my chest, I crept down the hallway, following the sounds until I reached the door of an empty conference room. And there, through the sliver of space between the door and the frame, I saw a sight that shattered my world into a million pieces. Ethan, my Ethan, the man I loved with every fiber of my being, locked in a passionate embrace with Vanessa, their bodies intertwined in a dance of lust and betrayal. As the realization of what I was witnessing crashed over me like a tidal wave, I felt the air being sucked from my lungs, the ground shifting beneath my feet. In that moment, everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, crumbled to dust. And as the tears streamed down my face, a newfound fire ignited within me, a fire fueled by rage, hurt, and a burning desire for revenge. The days and weeks following my devastating discovery passed in a blur of anguish and disbelief. I tried to confront Ethan about what I had witnessed, but he brushed off my concerns with a wave of his hand and a reassuring smile that no longer held any warmth. "You're imagining things, Jessa," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's just work stress getting to you. You know how Vanessa can be, all that intensity and ambition. It's nothing to worry about." But I knew better. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and no amount of placating words or empty promises could erase the image of Ethan and Vanessa's betrayal from my mind. As the tension between us mounted, Ethan grew more distant, spending longer hours at the office and finding excuses to avoid me. And all the while, Vanessa prowled the hallways like a lioness on the hunt, her every glance and gesture a silent taunt, a reminder of the secret she held over me. It was during one of these increasingly rare evenings together that I finally found the courage to confront Ethan head-on. We were sitting in tense silence, the weight of our unspoken truths hanging heavy in the air, when I finally broke. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "I've noticed you've been distant lately. Is something going on?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my gaze. "You're imagining things. It's just work stress." The familiar refrain, the same dismissive tone that had become his default response whenever I dared to broach the subject of his infidelity. Something inside me snapped, and before I could stop myself, the words came tumbling out in a torrent of pent-up emotion. "Don't lie to me, Ethan. I know about you and Vanessa. I saw you together in the conference room that night. I saw everything." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and panic. For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal, trapped and desperate for an escape route. But then, as the realization of his exposed betrayal sank in, his expression hardened, and a cruel sneer twisted his once handsome features. "So, you finally found out," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you to confront me, but I suppose even a mousy little thing like you has a breaking point." The insult stung, but I refused to let him see how deeply his words had cut me. Instead, I steeled myself, drawing upon the reserves of strength I didn't even know I possessed. "How could you do this to me, Ethan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "After everything we've been through, after all the promises you made?" He let out a harsh bark of laughter, his eyes cold and devoid of any trace of the love I had once seen in them. "Promises?" he spat. "Don't be so naive, Jessa. This was never about love or promises. It was about power and control, and you were just a means to an end." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. All this time, I had been nothing more than a pawn in Ethan's twisted game, a disposable piece to be sacrificed when the time was right. But even as the sting of his betrayal threatened to consume me, a new emotion began to take root. A burning, all-consuming fury that set my very soul ablaze. If Ethan thought he could discard me so easily, he was sorely mistaken. I would make him pay for his sins, for the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me. And as I looked into his cold, heartless eyes, I knew that this was only the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready for war. The aftermath of Ethan's confession was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. As the harsh reality of his deceit sank in, I found myself consumed by a burning desire for vengeance, a desire that threatened to overshadow every other aspect of my life. Ethan, for his part, seemed utterly unfazed by the emotional maelstrom he had unleashed. With a callousness that chilled me to the bone, he delivered the final blow. the words that would forever shatter the illusion of the life we had built together. "Vanessa's pregnant," he said, his voice devoid of any trace of remorse. "And I want a divorce." The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. Pregnant? Divorce? How could this be happening? How could the man I had loved with every fiber of my being be so cruel, so heartless? Before I could formulate a response, the sound of footsteps in the hallway heralded the arrival of a familiar figure. Margaret, her face a mask of fury and disgust. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her piercing gaze boring into Ethan with a mixture of rage and disappointment. Ethan met her stare with a defiant glare, his jaw set in a hard line. "I'm leaving Jessa," he said, his voice tinged with a note of finality. "Vanessa is carrying my child, and I want to be with her." Margaret's eyes widened in shock, her lips parting in a silent gasp of disbelief. For a moment, she looked as though she might crumple to the floor, the weight of Ethan's betrayal too much to bear. But then, something seemed to shift within her, a steely resolve hardening her features. She turned her gaze towards me, and for the first time I saw something other than disdain in her eyes. A flicker of respect, perhaps even empathy. "This is unthinkable," she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You have shamed this family, Ethan. You are no longer welcome in this company or in our lives." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You can't do this, Mother. This is my company, my legacy." "Your legacy?" Margaret spat, her words dripping with contempt. "You have squandered your legacy, boy. You have thrown it all away for a fleeting dalliance with that woman." Her gaze flickered towards me, and for a brief moment I saw something akin to regret in her eyes. "I never wanted this, Jessa," she said, her voice softening ever so slightly. "But he has left me no choice. We do what must be done." And just like that, a fragile alliance was forged, an unlikely partnership born from the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak. Margaret and I, two women united by a common enemy and a burning desire for justice. As Ethan stormed out of the room, his parting words a bitter promise of retaliation, I felt a newfound sense of purpose coursing through my veins. The battle had been joined, and I was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. Little did I know that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and deception, a twisted labyrinth of lies and manipulation that would test the very limits of my resolve. But in that moment, fueled by the fire of Margaret's righteous fury and my own thirst for vengeance, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The war had begun, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that Ethan and Vanessa paid for their sins. In the days and weeks that followed Ethan's explosive confession, Margaret and I forged an unlikely alliance, bound by our shared desire for vengeance against those who had wronged us. Despite our rocky history, we found common ground in our anger and determination to see justice served. "You underestimated me, Ethan," I spat, my voice dripping with venom as Margaret and I sat huddled in her opulent office, plotting our next move. "That was your first mistake." Margaret's lips curved into a grim smile, her eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. "And mine," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "I never wanted this, Jessa. But he left me no choice. We do what must be done." And so we hatched our plan, a meticulously choreographed dance of deception and manipulation designed to dismantle Ethan's world piece by piece. First, we would strike at the heart of his newfound happiness, Vanessa. With Margaret's resources and my insider knowledge of the company's inner workings, we began to unravel the tangled web of lies and deceit that Vanessa had spun. Slowly but surely, we exposed her true nature. A calculating, manipulative viper who had sunk her fangs into Ethan, poisoning his mind and heart with her toxic ambition. One by one, we revealed her misdeeds to the board, her illicit affairs and underhanded dealings laid bare for all to see. And as the truth came to light, the whispers and sidelong glances began, until Vanessa found herself ostracized and reviled by those she had once sought to impress. "Please, Jessa," she begged, cornering me in the hallway one day, her once flawless facade crumbling under the weight of her exposed duplicity. "You have to help me. I'm carrying Ethan's child." I met her pleading gaze with a cold, impassive stare, reveling in the sweet taste of her desperation. "You brought this on yourself, Vanessa," I said, my voice devoid of any trace of sympathy. "You made your bed, now lie in it." With Vanessa's downfall, The first domino had fallen, and Ethan's world began to unravel at the seams. Stripped of his position and his power, he found himself adrift, a once mighty titan reduced to a mere shadow of his former self. And through it all, Margaret stood by my side, her steely resolve never wavering, even as the weight of her own guilt threatened to consume her. "I never wanted this for him," she confessed one evening, her voice barely above a whisper as we sipped glasses of expensive scotch in the dimly lit confines of her study. "He was my son, my flesh and blood, but he left me no choice." I reached across the table, placing my hand atop hers in a rare moment of shared vulnerability. "He made his choices. Margaret," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "now he has to live with the consequences." As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Margaret extended an unexpected olive branch, an offer to take the reins of the company, to lead it into a new era of prosperity and redemption. "You've proven your worth, Jessa," she said, her eyes shining with a newfound respect. "You might as well make it official." And as I looked into her eyes, I saw not just the hard-won victory of our shared vendetta, but the promise of a new beginning, a chance to rise from the ashes of betrayal and forge a path of my own making. With a steadying breath, I accepted her offer, knowing that the road ahead would be paved with challenges and obstacles, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that, perhaps, the darkest chapters of my life were finally behind me. Little did I know that the true test of my resilience was yet to come.